So to start our project, let's create new directory on the desktop and let's call it GraphQL movies app. Inside this folder, we want to have another folder called API to hold all the backend code for our projects. Now we want to initialize our project with ECMAScript by passing this command npm init to initialize the project with this flag for everything. This line of code will set the type module inside package.json because we want to support ECMAScript module. Type enter. Now let's open the project with Visual Studio Code. And now I want to use the integrated terminal inside VS Code. Now let's install the Apollo server and GraphQL model by running npm install at apollo-server and the GraphQL. Once the installation is finished, let's create source folder for our project. And inside the source folder, we want to have the index file, which is the main entry of our application. And the first thing we have to do is to import the Apollo server from Apollo server module. So let's say import Apollo server, and this comes from the Apollo server. Okay. Before launching our GraphQL server, it's crucial to understand the fundamental components inherent in every GraphQL server and shaping its functionality. The first component known as type definition and the second one as resolvers. And type definition known as well as a schema. And the schema basically serves as a blueprint for the data accessible through the GraphQL server, and it's precisely outlined the queries clients are permitted to execute and define the structure of the data that can be retrieved from the server. Now let's keep it in a simple constant called const type tips equal, and here I'm going to use the backtick so I can span multiple lines. Inside this template literal, we will write all our GraphQL code. And let's write our first query, type query. You can see the query with capital Q must match exact because it's built in, which is an object. Inside we define simple field with name hello. The hello field return a type string, and the exclamation mark means that this field is required and can never be null. The trailing exclamation mark known as well as a type modifier. Why? Because it modifies the type that can be null. And there is another common type here, which is a pair of square brackets like this, which means this field, for instance, that will return an array of another type, which is the string in this case. Okay, let's keep it a simple string. And now it's time to talk about resolvers. Resolvers are an implementation for our schema. Basically, resolvers are functions that we call to return what we have here inside the schema. So let's create a resolver constant, and it's an object as well. And inside here we have the query object with capital Q as well. And you can notice on the top we have type query exactly are the same, so they must match the same names. And the field here we have the hello, which return a type string. Now we can say hello, the same name, and create a function that return a hardcode string. Okay, let's say this function will return hello from GraphQL. The next step is initializing our Apollo server by creating a new const, call it server, and will be equal to the new Apollo server. And the new instance of Apollo server accepts an object as its argument. So we have the property to define. The first one is type diffs, and we have to pass our type diffs. And the second one is resolvers. Okay, now we need a helper function from Apollo server called start send alarm server. Basically, this function, it helps us to start quickly with Apollo server, and we can import it from Apollo server standalone. Let's import this function from Apollo server standalone. So import. The start send alone function returns a promise contained URL where the server is running, which we can save it in a constant variable, say const, and we pass the URL here and the equal, and don't forget to use a wait method. Okay, this start send alone function takes two parameters. The first one is required and the second one is optional. The first one is the instance of our Apollo server, which lives here in the server. So I pass here the server, and the second one is optional, and we can pass, for instance, the listen method if we want to listen in specific port for our Apollo server when it's running. So we can listen, and we pass here the port that we like to use. So let's say port, for instance, 9000. Okay. Now, when we're running our server, it will run in the port 9000. Since this parameter is optional, we can keep it empty, and Apollo server basically will use the default port, which is 4000. Okay, the last thing I want to do is to print in the console a message say that Apollo server is working correctly. Okay, let's say console.log and open two parentheses. Inside we use backtick again and say server ready at, and here we want to insert the URL variable. Okay, and it's where print in the console that server is ready at, and the URL will be the localhost 4000. So to run our server, we have to make a new script that tells node to run our index.js, and let's call it diff. So we want to run node src/index. Okay, save your modification inside package.js and let's run npm run div. Okay, and we'll get an error, maybe something. Dot. Okay, I have an extra dot here. Sorry about that. Save again and run your npm again. Now it's working just fine. You can now visit the link in your browser. What you see here in the browser is the Apollo Sandbox, which is a tool that will allow us to explore our API and test it before going to build a real front end for our project. It's divided to four main sections. The first one is the operation where we can write your queries, mutation, and so on. And the documentation section will contain all queries, mutations, and all operation you have in your application. For our case, for now, we have only one single query, so we'll get one single query here. And this part is the response part. We'll get the response every time we fire a query. So let's run this query we have here, and we get the right response for our query exactly, which have one field, and the return hard-coded string says hello from GraphQL. Okay, we can as well use shortcut for adding queries and mutation. If we want to avoid any mistakes, we are going to write queries by clicking this plus button here, and we run the query, we get the same result. In this section here, bottom, we have the variable and headers. Basically, this section will go to use it in next lecture. We are going to deal with variables and headers. We are going to talk about authentication. We will need these headers to pass, for example, the token to the backend to validate some queries or operation that need the authentication from user. You can have multiple queries here and switch between them. For example, this query, you can select the one you want to run. And something I like to do is to change to the dark mode for my studio, and if you like a dark mode, you can choose the dark mode as well. And that's it for now. In the next lecture, we are going to talk about types in GraphQL.